Welcome to another hands-on video from TMS Software about FNC Maps. I got quite a few good comments from the last video I did about FNC Maps and how you can display events from a map. The example displayed accidents in one of the 50 states of the United States of America on a certain date. And the video is still available on YouTube for free. You can have a look at it if you want to know how to build a map that displays incidents like this and clusters them like this. So that is not the topic of this hands-on. I decided to create a web version of the whole thing because obviously we used FNC, and FNC is, as you know, not only cross-framework, meaning you can use any FNC component in the VCL, FireMonkey, or the LCL, which is the Lazarus framework. No, you can also build it for different platforms, meaning Mac, Windows, and mobile platforms like iOS, Android, and of course with TMS WEB Core for the web. And here you see the application that we built in the last video, and if I click here, this is what my form looks like in TMS WEB Core. And you can see that the elements are exactly the same, and this is what I want to focus on right now. Just how would you build the form to get to the same result that you reached in the VCL application? Because that is, for me, I gotta be honest, this is the #1 problem for me. How can I get components or controls arranged on the web easily? As I've said in many webinars, one in Germany a couple of days ago, and there will be a webinar coming up shortly that will be at this time most likely already available on the web, where I show that with TMS WEB Core you are really in charge how you define your forms. You can either select the approach that I use here using the form designer in Delphi to align your controls and also to drop your controls at a position that you want them. Then you have the approach that you only use the HTML, which you, if you look in the Project Explorer or Project Manager, I think is the formal term. If you look in the Project Manager, you see that not only you have DFM in the Delphi project, you also have the HTML file, which contains HTML. And by default, there is really nothing in there. All the design comes from the form designer. However, you can also say everything that concerns design is in the HTML, and the controls are simply used to define your application logic. And of course, you can use a mix, and this is exactly what I'm doing in this application. I'm using the controls on the form, and I'm using additional elements from a CSS framework, namely Bootstrap, to make my web application appear like a modern web application. So if I switch over to the browser, we see that this pretty much looks like the VCL application that I built previously, you know. And the nice thing is that this also resizes and that you have the same kind of information in the same way. And the key is that you need to always keep in mind is with FNC, you only write the code once. So if I select Florida here, and what is the date that I picked here? I picked 6/30/2020, show incidents. So you see you get the exact same result, just this is a web application. But I'm using the exact same controls that I use in the VCL application. It's not magic, it's simply using TMS FNC mapping, which gives you the opportunity to use maps on any platform in any framework. So let me focus on the main part of the visual in this application, namely these three controls and the map control. We are going to build this from scratch. I'm going to leave this application now. I'm just going to focus on how would you build something that aligns like this and also resizes. Also see that this doesn't have any responsive behavior in the kind that if you were to open it on a mobile phone, that this goes down here and this goes down there. No, I actually intentionally picked an approach that was much easier than that, that would simply allow me to define certain relation between the three components. What I wanted to have is that this is 3/4, this is the remaining quarter, so this area is supposed to be my 100%, and then this button should always be the same size of 150 pixels, because I don't want the button to resize. It doesn't make any sense, because the only thing that might happen if you resize the button is, and this is actually one of the worst things that can happen for a user wanting to use your application, that it moves on multiple lines, meaning the show is in the first line, the incident is in the second line, and your button also changes its height. And that is definitely not something you want to do. And TMS has controls for this so that you don't need any HTML or CSS magic. No, you actually can use controls for this. So I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to move this to the other display that I use, so I have a point of reference, and I'm going to close this all, and we're going to create a new TMS web application. I've gotten quite a few questions, and this hands-on series is actually the right time to explain this. Holger, how did you get this into this menu? I'm quite surprised that a lot of people don't make use of this great feature. You can go to Customize in this menu, and there you see all the different categories with all the different templates that you have in there. So for example, if you go to Delphi Web or TMS Web, you see all the different application types that TMS Web offers. So what you can do is, if you want it in the menu, because here are the menu items, you see that this is, and I can't open the menu right now, this is the menu that pops up if you say File, New. So if I wanted to add, for example, the option to add a Xdata server, I can simply go to TMS Web or to TMS Xdata and say, hey, TMS Xdata VCL server, drop it down here. And of course, I want to be able to create an Xdata service, drop it here, okay. And now File, New, and there you see you have your templates right in the menu. And of course, you can remove existing items just as easily. You go to, for example, package. I never need the package. And oh, that's not what I want to do. I definitely don't want to do it as the default application on startup. I want to get rid of it, so I move it here. And I also don't need a console application. And the separator is already there. So if you wanted to have another separator, you can add those as well. That's that. File, New. Simple TMS web application, no PWA, no Electron, and this is the whole web page. You know, this is your area where you can design or drop your controls. And what we are going to use is, of course, first the map control and FNC Maps right here. And let's switch to a service that actually works without a key, for example, Open Layers. So you see this during design time already. And this control we're going to align in the end as AL client. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to align it to AL button first, so I can design this area on top. In the meantime, I cut this out. I saved the project as navx.web. Index.html is our entry point. And the form I named forms main. What I didn't do, and this is something I always tend to forget, the instance is still the form1 of tform1, so I also have to rename the form and not only the file. So let's go here, name form main, that's it, and save. So at this point we already have a running web application. You don't believe me? Let me run and compile, or compile and run, that's the right order. And if I drag this over here, here's our web application. It's aligned as AL bottom, right? Because it's on the bottom. So that's what you expect, and it behaves the same way in the web browser as it would in a VCL form. So the next step is, and let me do a little experiment here, if we invoke the live preview functionality, let's see if that works. Go back to that window, there it is. Perfect. So if I make changes to it, for example, if I select here AL left, save it. Let's see what happens to the live preview, which should be updated. If yes, there it is. So it takes a little bit, but there is a timer, I guess, that checks if anything changed, and as soon as it changes, you get the update. And this way you can learn how to align your controls on the form if you're rather new to it. So the live preview feature makes it even easier than before. And of course, if you're not recording like I am, you can put the live preview browser window on a different display and align your controls, and on the other display you see how you aligned your controls. So going back to form design, AL bottom, and now how do we design the toolbar? Let's call it a toolbar. It's not a toolbar, but it's like three different components and a button. And what we need for the job, if you type grid, you see that we have a TWebGridPanel, and that delivers exactly the functionality that we need. So we align that at top, align AL top, and right now it would be sticking right on the top of your form, so that's not what you want. So you can actually use the alignment features. Let me drag this here of the object inspector like you use from the VCL. Yes, you can really say align with margins, and you can of course increase the margins. For example, top 20. So now we have a margin of 20 pixels to the top of the browser, which makes it much more readable. On the left, let's say 15, right 15, and the bottom, we don't need that many, like 5. And the number of rows, right now it would be the combo box, the date control. What we need here is 3. So can we do that? So we see we have a row collection, but we also have a column collection. So I go here into the column collection and can add column items. But you could also right-click this and add a column, remove a column, add a row, remove a row, all integrated into the context menu. Let's use the navigator instead. And we create TWebGridPanel column instances, and each column can be configured with alignment. Here you could link to CSS classes from a web designer. So if you say, hey, I want a certain frame, I want a certain font, and you can link it to a CSS from your web designer, and you wouldn't have to worry about any of that. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to select the size style, %, and I set 3/4, which is 75%, right, for the first control. So the first column right here should be 75%. That's it. And I could also define a margin, like 5 additional pixels. And the second one is for the date selection control, and that should be the remaining 25%. So that's that. And we need another column, and that will be the column for the button. And this is where the magic happens. You don't say %. It's an absolute value of 150 pixels. And here you see now that the visualization, of course, is off, because this sets it to 150. This is 75%, and this is 25%. If this total here is 100%, of course. So the visualization isn't off, but of course your browser window will look like this, most likely. Okay, so going from here, you have to drop the controls into this control. It works the same way as a panel. The only thing you need to remember, you need to drop the controls in the correct order, meaning you have to start with the combo box that is supposed to take up all the states. So combo, and you see we have a TWeb combo box. You can of course also use FNC controls. So if you used FNC controls in your desktop application, you would be able to use the exact same controls here. I'm not going to do this. I'm going to do the web combo box to not complicate things if you want to reproduce this without having the FNC UI pack installed, which includes those controls. And then the second control is something that has date in it, and thankfully TMS Web has the TWeb date time picker. You drop it anywhere here and it's automatically getting aligned into the toolbar. And the button is going to be a little bit nasty because it's not going to look great at design time, as you can see here. But what is happening? So why isn't this going up to here, and why isn't this going over this? So if you run it after setting the map where we actually want it, AL client, when we run this now, then we should see that the behavior is nothing that we want yet. So this is what it looks like, and this is what my example looks like. Okay, so the problem is that this combo box doesn't use all the space that it has. So here, if you go to the developer console of your web browser, it has a tool where you can click here, and there you see that this area is reserved correctly, but the control, meaning the combo box here, doesn't take the whole space. So you need a means to tell this combo box, hey, use all the space you have on the x-axis. You know, you're telling it, no, don't go down on the y-axis. No, you want it on the x-axis, meaning width. You use the width property, you have to make changes to the width property and not the height. And the same here, that right now we're pretty lucky, but as soon as I make this smaller, at some point it might overlap. I'm lucky it does not. We also see that this works pretty good. The 150 is always reserved, and this button thankfully isn't wider than 150 pixels. So this also, by coincidence, works out in our advantage, but it's not something that we intentionally set. So this would be a lucky thing to work out rather well at first, but here this might not be wide enough, or it doesn't look as designed. So what we need to do, or what we can do, is we can go to the combo box control, and TMS WEB Core has different options how the width of your controls are calculated or determined. And here you see the width style right now is absolute, meaning it's not the percentage value or whatever. The width is set absolute, meaning the width value is used. So this thing, this control is always going to be 145 pixels no matter what. If this is smaller than 155, the control won't care. It will overlap most likely. So what you want is also that it's either automatic, or the key to the solution here is you can also use percent. And the width is supposed to be 100% of the cell or of the column that you defined. And this is exactly what you can do with width percent. So at 100%, the control fills the column completely. If you were to set it to 50, it would fill out exactly 50% of the column. But that's not what we want. We want 100%. And we can do the same for the date time picker. We can simply say 100, which is width percent, which is not being considered right now because it's still set to SS absolute. And so we set this to SS percent. And voila, we got it right here. And finally, we need to have a look at the button. Here we can't use the percentage of 100 because we have set an absolute value of 150. And that's also what I'm going to use here. We set the width style to SS absolute and the width to 150, or you could actually do 145. So as you can see that it's fitting nicely into the cell. If you run this now, you should have the alignment that I have in the example application. You see, this is definitely 3/4. This is the remaining quarter. This is 150. And now to the final step. How did I get the style for the fonts that is a standard. You know, if you look at other web pages, that is actually, if you go back to my page, or if I look at this page, this is actually the standard that is used in any application, web application that has been designed in Bootstrap, because it is easily readable, the fonts are selected. So how did that work? So what I did is I selected for the form the CSS library as a Bootstrap, and I also loaded the JavaScript library, the Bootstrap library, version 4. So now the web application automatically uses the Bootstrap framework, which is a framework that uses CSS to accommodate web developers that their web pages look the same way on any browser and on any device, and that facilitates development of great web designs. And you can be certain, if you get a web design from a professional web designer, that library is most likely being used. And what we do here is not that we load something into the application. This is just a helper that adds the necessary references inside of it has to be added to the design. It's not part of the application. And these parts are added to the design automatically by TMS WEB Core and its IDE integration. So if you run this now, you're not going to see any big differences, I would think, because right now you have not linked your controls to the framework. What you can do is you can select this, and if you look up in the documentation of Bootstrap, you find the different class names that you can also see if you click the arrow here, and there's the form control. And everything that you define as a form control gets round corners, and it looks exactly like most forms are designed nowadays. So linking this again, or compiling this again, see, everything is round. The font has also been updated, and the same happens here. Let's add a couple of static items in here, just a couple. Georgia, New York, New Jersey, Florida. That's enough. Okay, there we go. Do this again because I want to show you a different problem that you might encounter when you do this. So here it looks great, right? So we select Florida, and now Florida is completely cut off, right? So that's another thing. We only looked at the width so far. So in order to make sure that your controls aren't cut off when you have fonts in there that are loaded by the web designer or the web design, you can select, oh, this, I have to focus on this in a minute. So you can actually set the height the same way as you do the width. You know, you have the height style, and you can do SS% or SS auto. And percent gives you the same kind of percentages like with the width, but here the absolute value could be increased as well if you were so brave, you know. But what makes it a better solution is because you have the row from the grid. So the row of the grid kind of keeps your controls in check. If you were to set the height to SS auto, the control would render itself with a height that it needs, and you can be sure that it's not going to cover the map because your grid contains the control. We do the same for the date control. This is auto, and that's it. Let's see what happens. And there you go. So now if we select the state, it's nicely centered, and we also see that the map hasn't been overlapped by anything. If you don't know how big your grid gets, right now we aligned it as AL top, you can also set the height style of the grid itself to SS auto. That will make sure that your grid will grow and will push the map down in case it gets bigger. So the final thing to do is the show incidents button. And the button, as in Bootstrap, you have the element class name. And what I picked is button primary, which should yield the blue button that is used in forms that have been designed with Bootstrap. And that's all it takes to model a button. Of course, I think in the example that I created, I added the font manually. So I basically what I did was I selected a font and changed the font here. But what you can also do is that the font should be determined by the framework. So you switch from element font EF property, which means the button gets its font right now from the font property of the button. I switch this to EF CSS. And if you think you're ready now, you'll be surprised if you run it, because that is something that the IDE sadly cannot facilitate. It still didn't change, right? But if you look at the Bootstrap documentation, you see that you don't need to specify button primary only, you also need to specify button. So in HTML, or in your HTML document, you would actually say button space button primary, because first of all the button class is supposed to be used, and then the additional styling from the button primary class. And if you run it now, and I know that I still lack one important piece, but if you run it now, you have the button as it is used in forms. And the piece that is missing now, and you should be able to solve this yourself, we still have the height style set to SS absolute. So if we set that to SS auto and then start it again, we should be seeing the button as high as it needs to be and as wide as it needs to be. Voila! So now it fits nicely. It looks exactly like a web application should look. And the final thing that I just noticed, it's a new feature of version 1.5 actually. It's a tiny little thing, but it is so nice to have, because so far you wouldn't be able to type something into the combo box. So that is not what Delphi thinks is a combo box, right? Normally you would be able to type something here. In HTML, usually you can't, but with TMS WEB Core, they added the style property, and now you have the traditional drop-down combo box where you can type text and also select. So that is a new feature. I love it. Like here, I could type Florida, and you see here from a list the Florida. So that is something that was added with version 1.5. Usually you only need for selections the traditional style, or the style that has been used in HTML all this time, and that is CS drop-down list. But TMS WEB Core offers more, and you can actually use the combo box also now to enter values. Well, that concludes the short review how to build a tiny little toolbar with 3 controls that are aligned on a grid panel and also align a map on the bottom in the client area. And it is good to know that you can use a mix of alignment. You could also use anchors, of course, and the grid control gives you, or the grid panel control gives you control how to align all the different controls in a row, multiple rows, and pretty much covers a lot of stuff that you need to do when you transfer existing VCL applications to the web, so that your users basically have the same experience as on the desktop applications. And of course, you could also build a responsive grid with the, where is it? Let me see, with the TWeb responsive grid component, which gives you different column alignment for different screen sizes. So you can define a different column alignment for smartphones than you would for desktop. But that would be too complex as a start. I wanted to give you a hands-on tutorial how to get started with grids in TMS WEB Core, and I hope you like it. See you soon.